So that was August, and then uh, I wrote like over the course of 2 days like a 90-word thread about universities and how they should have been like secular monasteries. It was this whole thing, but instead they became like power production plants for social power. And like I was just sort of like well, obviously currency is socially exchanged. Like to me, social power and relative social power can categorize. So like essentially, I was like, uh, that and I love that you have a philosophy background. So of all the people I know, I should be talking to you in the most detail about any of this. But I also worry about like just like ending up sending you like 25 messages. But essentially, um, I wanted to hinge it on something meta, which is the ability to perceive a sense of correctness and how that evolves over time. And then correctness, I don't mean in this small scale about like ideological. I just mean like any sense of correctness. Almost just like a better term for it would be like peace with exactly how the world is, status quo in this instant. And then obviously we depart from that internally all the time, right? Like even right now, I'm a little bit too cold. You know what I mean? And then so power would be the ability to realize whatever, like if you can stop time and in that instant just download all the information about from your brain about like a perception of correctness and have this like complete three-dimensional universal picture, and then look at the differences between that and the actual world you're living in. How can power, like that was sort of like how I was thinking about power. And a lot of this, just to give you my sources or influences, obviously Schopenhauer's Will to Power, which Nietzsche developed a lot too, not Foucault, but mainly just Schopenhauer. So anyway, and then where was I? So I wrote this long 90 thing, but it wasn't very philosophical. It was more just like about hierarchy and you know um, like climbing this hierarchy and how that obsession with social power decays wisdom, because you can just look around for evidence like things that have social power aren't really wise, aren't really like into truth and reason, and all these like things that the platitudes are there, but like the actual oomph of it, in America just seems like it's really not there. I don't just mean Yale, I just mean like look everywhere in America. It just seems so bizarrely like, and I'm just like, all right, well, also, most of these people have college degrees, except for maybe like when I think about cultural power, I think about the same things you do, and I'm just like, maybe just in the entertainment industry, there really isn't a college thing, but otherwise, like colleges are so important, blah blah blah. They should have been. And so I wrote this 90 thing, and then I wrote an email to every faculty member of Yale Law School. I just like literally copied and pasted the emails blindly, and I didn't notice your name. That's the funny thing. I did not notice your name. I just like literally like just like copied and pasted and went so quickly. And I sent an email to every professor at Yale Law School. This is back in late August, and I called it a stick of dynamite in the American elite. And the voice I used was intentionally provocative. Like the email was just like, "Hey everybody!" Like it was very, very just like the voice I had been using on Twitter. And so like yeah, so that was last August, and since then, how has the project expanded? Well, uh, you know, it's so funny because this isn't really just, you just said go back to philosophy land. It's funny because this project obviously incorporates a lot of philosophy, but it incorporates so much like obviously a parody of, like I call it my American voice on Twitter, where I'm just like such like the level of confidence and arrogance and hubris and narcissism is really over the top and kind of shameless. But then I'm just like, isn't it funny I can get away with this because one, I'm self-aware about it, and two, I'm fighting for a larger cause. Like that seems like a loophole. Like as long as you're fighting for something good, and then you're self-aware, and then you don't actually, like if you follow certain rules, you can actually get away with sounding like this big of a dick. Um, and so the entire project has exploded since then, because last August it was at like 200 tweets, and now it's at like 6,000, and it's covered so many different things, like Amy Chua, obviously Yale Law School, the British royal family, Meghan Markle, pop culture, various celebrities, um, all to produce this story of essentially that the I think you read kind of what I was like to me, reason, wisdom, um, should be something we hold sacred. And my theory is basically that essentially God is just a binary. There's a binary between like the moral up and the moral down inside all of us. And fundamentally, it has to do with unity, sharing, shared power, and reason, which luckily for us is universal. So team unity and wisdom versus their opposites. But we're called, but basically like our egos have a gravity, tribalism has a like our tribes, our cults are like more insular things have smaller gravities, and so I basically say anything that isn't perfect is satanic. And so Satan is everywhere. And so like I'm not saying like therefore we need to all be like monks. We need to all be like I am not saying that because I'm not a monk, as you know, right? But I am saying why are we not even like teaching our kids that this is like a dynamic that exists if it's universal? That is my big question. Like this is a dynamic inside all of us that exists, like these smaller gravities, larger gravities things. So if it makes sense and everyone checks it, verifies it, and is like, oh yeah, that's a good story about like what's going on as we relate to each other morally, then like we should probably pay attention to it and not like pretend like, oh yeah, there's no such thing as Satan, there's no such thing as a universal moral up and down, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, this would be a giant stand against moral relativism, postmodernity, et cetera. And so it's evolved into this giant thing. And then the only intellectual step I took there was like, wait a minute, if I can actually do this correctly, so not do this correctly, if this actually makes sense, I just won a bunch of social power for myself because I'm just like I'm not like a philosopher kind of like making an argument, in a philosophy journal for moral realism because I think they would have a similar amount of power if they just self-marketed differently, if they were right and they could convince everyone, which is the big if, obviously. But I'm just like, if I can convince everyone, or if this is true and everyone can latch onto it, then this would fit into a larger human history narrative of like, well, Nietzsche said God is dead, and then someone came along, 137 years later, and said, actually, not so fast. That's a giant story. That's not a small story. That's it's just like, holy shit. That would basically that. This is my point. There's a hole in the God is dead idea, which is God better really be dead, and there better be no combination of words. There better be no combination of ideas, thoughts, and words inside the Library of Babel, anywhere inside that infinite library that can be translated into different vernaculars, into different styles, voices, tones, languages, such that everyone in humanity is like, this makes sense, this is universal, yeah, checks out. Because if there is that universal thing inside all of our subconscious, or literally just inside of how we like built into the concept of perception, then the first person who taps into it and writes about it well and sells it well would be very powerful. Because they could easily just say, hey, this is a higher power than us because it's higher than, smaller than any specific thing that humans can't arrange beyond this. So this is taller than humanity, taller than what we can do with our free wills. We can't like break outside of like, we can't like leave the idea of perceiving the world, correctly or incorrectly. Um, and so it would be like a transcendent higher power with moral and existential implications. That's kind of like historically what the word God was about. God, like it's not true that yes, the idea of a celestial being in the sky with like a him with a he pronoun, like that is dead. That is dead. We're never gonna go back to that unless like something like cult like happens. But cults are rising everywhere. Something cult like probably will happen anyway. We probably need something universal. Um, so I'm getting very passionate about it, but obviously, I think you can hear from the message that it's been a lot, and there is a lot. But I'm just like, huh, that's so funny. Like, there's like a God-sized hole in the middle of God is dead, and whoever can claim 100% of it would be very, very powerful. Let me demonstrate that. And so I was like, one day I just like renamed my profile from like, a stick of dynamite in the American elite to the second coming of Jesus Christ, who's gonna resurrect. I just went with it, and then completely aside from that, like, I was able to find like all of these coincidences that that's kind of like a different thing, but are more. Anyway, that part I don't even want to really talk about, although I do go into detail about it publicly. And then I'm just kind of just like, you know what? This is all a lot. I literally, my initial intentions with this dynamite was really just like make a few basic points about social striving, but it's completely exploded way, way beyond that. And now I'm just kind of like, all right, so I really feel like, given everything I've packed into this dynamite, and it really is just my second book, it's like a revolutionary way of reading a gay memoir, is how I've marketed it also, or how I've branded it. Um, I really feel like it's either lifelong obscurity, or like the moment I publish a book, this all gets unburied. And this is just such like an objectively weird and intense, um, and obviously ambitious project. So it's just been weird for all of those reasons that you can imagine. Um, and then I was thinking about how to take it to the next level, in the sense of just like, all right, well, at some point, um, I do want media attention, because that's the only way to gain credibility for uh, the claims I make, which include like claims about coincidences that need to be publicly verified. They're all drawn from like pop culture and stuff, or else my life story, which is also very, very weird. I have this very bizarre life story that really reads like reverse Moses. Like basically like my biological dad, I'm like an illegitimate child who grew up poor in the United States, to someone who's a famous philosopher in China. And who's an elite, and he's married to like a famous film director in China, and they're just like the Chinese elite. It's just weird. So I just like took all this and spun it into a story, a very sort of like modern day like version of like an ancient parable. And I'm just like, all right, so I'm just waiting it's basically done. So I'm just waiting for the media to find it, to verify it, so that it can get some sort of traction. And again, what is the point? Well, to disrupt so many things that I see as anti-God, aka anti-reason, anti-wisdom, and anti-moral, like immoral, that is just completely swallowing up our modernity. Um, so, uh, so I'm at a weird point where I'm just like done with the project basically, but I'm just waiting for media attention and media verification. And then the weird part of that is also just like, I thought I was going to end the project, and then like last night I was stoned, and I was with Patrick. You remember Patrick? I was with Patrick and Ilya, and I was just like, I'm so done with this project. Like I've been saying that for months actually, that I was done with it. But then I had this new idea. I was just like, wait a minute, what if I get Yale law professors scared? Um, and obviously I don't mind scaring powerful people. Like that's the whole like the fear of God. Like if God's actually a good and universal thing, right? Like if you use reason and moral, you know, points that everyone can agree with about power and how it's being. To me, God is shared power. Satan is hoarded power, and hoarded power is basically everywhere. And so, yeah, like the only way to disrupt that probably is to scare powerful people. Like I'm not asking for like obviously, hopefully this is obvious. I'm anti-violence. I'm anti, like just basically all the classic stuff. Like I don't depart from that. Like I'm very, very like classic and predictable in my moral viewpoints. But I'm also just like they're not like the media has no incentive to do anything about this. They have no incentive except money. I could become famous, and they could derive money. Like that's the only incentive they have to get this to the public. And so I'm just trying to think things through their incentive. I'm just like, what if I do something that's kind of like juicy, And at the same time, these like Yale law professors who obviously like I think the more they get to know the work I've done, the more they're like probably just like, well, this guy's intelligent, philosophically serious, and making claims that even if I don't agree with them, I can see a lot of people agreeing with them if they become famous, right? Like this is all a problem. And so I just had an idea last night to kind of like go into it by creating like the summer of the second coming, where every Friday, it's from a Lana Del Rey song. She says, "I feel so alone on a Friday night." I'm just like, yeah, I feel so alone on Friday night. I'm just waiting to be discovered. So in the meantime, I'm just going to write about a different Yale law professor in detail using like my gift with words and language and storytelling. Um, history. Like that's what it comes down to for me. It's just like crazy things have happened in history to like like Martin Luther, the 95 theses or however. I always forget the number 93, 95. Um, disruption. You know, like I know ever since I was a kid, I thought that when the world was unjust and unfair, I was always a fan of you know people who were brave enough to disrupt it. And I shouldn't say, um, but with that said, I'm very human. You know who I am, or you know a bit about me, certainly from living together. So like I'm also just kind of like, what the fuck, also, um, even if that's not the tone I adopt publicly, for like the sake of creative work. Um, but like fundamentally, I'm just like this is a really fucked world in many, many different ways. Like, besides the fact that like slavery exists, and besides the fact that there are literally, like last night, like I was on the street, just every time you go out in downtown New Haven, you just see like human despair next to like, obviously just like, your life where I'm just like drinking, my sparkling, like, and the stasis, uh, the non-disruption, the sort of just continued stasis, like just just really seems kind of dumb and immoral to me for all sorts of different reasons. So that's ultimately why I'm doing this. Obviously, self-interest is involved too. I don't want to discount that because yes, it would be really cool to be the type of person who does this. I know that, like that feels cool to me too, and So I think what's great about universality is in a dystopia, there's always an interest, a self-interest to align your self-interest of like, being a hero of a story, right? Like how narcissistic, right? With like, well, like how good of a job do you do helping others? Like that alignment between God and Satan, idealism and its opposite, narcissism, et cetera, is something that I believe that we're all capable of. So it's one of the ways I see human nature.